Have you ever walked into a room and immediately sensed something was wrong, even though everyone was smiling? Have you ever known someone was lying before they finished their sentence? Have you ever felt exhausted after social gatherings, not because you talked too much, but because you absorbed everything everyone wasn't saying? If you answered yes to any of these questions, you possess what psychologists call superior perception. And this audiobook will reveal why this extraordinary ability might be the most dangerous gift you'll ever receive. Think about what it means to go through life with this capacity. While others see surfaces, you see layers. While others accept facades, you penetrate them automatically. While others participate in comfortable social fictions, you cannot help but perceive the uncomfortable truths beneath them. This isn't a skill you developed or a talent you cultivated. This is how your brain is wired, how your consciousness operates, how you experience reality itself. And it's lonely. Profoundly, devastatingly lonely in ways that people without this perception cannot comprehend. Throughout history, certain individuals have possessed an uncanny ability to see what others cannot. They read micro-expressions in milliseconds, detecting emotional states before the person experiencing them becomes consciously aware. They sense hidden emotions beneath polished facades, feeling the desperation behind confident presentations or the rage behind pleasant smiles. They detect psychological patterns that escape even trained professionals, recognizing behavioral trajectories and relationship dynamics that predict future outcomes with startling accuracy. They see through social masks, recognizing immediately when someone is performing rather than being authentic. They recognize lies instantly, not through logical deduction, but through automatic perception of incongruence between words and underlying reality. They feel the unconscious tensions that fill every space they enter, absorbing the unspoken conflicts, denied emotions, and suppressed truths that everyone else has learned to ignore. But here's what makes this discovery so dangerous. These same individuals consistently end up isolated, exhausted, and unable to maintain normal relationships. Not because they're mentally unstable, not because they're socially incompetent, but because seeing everything comes with a psychological cost that most people cannot comprehend. In this audiobook, we'll explore the most dangerous aspects of possessing superior perception. We'll examine why this rare ability either destroys you completely or transforms you into something extraordinary. We'll uncover the psychological mechanisms that make seeing too much both a blessing and a curse. And most importantly, we'll reveal the integration process that allows you to harness this gift without being consumed by it. You're about to discover why some of the most perceptive people in history ended up isolated and broken, while others used this same ability to change the world. You'll learn which type of superior perceiver you are, what specific dangers you face, and how to transform your overwhelming gift into conscious wisdom. This isn't just another self-help audiobook about sensitivity. This is a comprehensive guide to understanding the most misunderstood psychological phenomenon of our time, the danger of seeing what others don't, and the path to making this danger your greatest strength. Let's begin with the discovery that changed everything we thought we knew about human perception. Chapter 1. The Case That Revealed Everything. The turning point in understanding superior perception came from clinical observations that defied conventional psychological explanation. Mental health professionals had long documented patients who seemed to possess extraordinary perceptive abilities, but these cases were typically dismissed as either delusional or simply highly intuitive personalities. Then, researchers began noticing a disturbing pattern. In the early 20th century, clinicians started documenting patients with what they termed differentiated perception. These weren't psychotic individuals experiencing hallucinations. They weren't paranoid personalities projecting their fears onto others. They were highly functional people who could accurately read psychological states in others with startling precision. One particular case stands out as the revelation that changed how we understand this phenomenon. A woman in her early 30s sought treatment in 1913, not because she was mentally ill, but because her extraordinary perceptive abilities were destroying her life. She represented what would later be categorized as an extremely rare personality type, the introverted intuitive with undifferentiated perception. Her symptoms were unlike anything in standard diagnostic manuals. She could walk into any room and immediately sense the psychological atmosphere. Who was experiencing hidden emotional pain? Who harbored secret resentments? Who was lying about their true feelings? Her accuracy wasn't occasional or vague. It was consistent and specific. Clinical notes from her treatment reveal the disturbing precision of her abilities. The patient displays an extraordinary capacity for perceiving unconscious contents in others, but this faculty appears to cause her considerable distress rather than advantage. The documentation contains specific examples that demonstrate just how precise her perception was. She would meet someone for the first time and accurately describe their childhood trauma without any prior information. She would sit in a business meeting and correctly identify which partnerships would fail based on unconscious dynamics she perceived between the participants. She would attend social gatherings and leave with detailed psychological profiles of every person present, profiles that later proved accurate when verified through careful investigation. But this precision came at a devastating cost. She couldn't engage in normal small talk because she saw through every social facade. While others chatted pleasantly about weather and weekend plans, she perceived the depression, anxiety, marital problems, financial stress, and existential crises that everyone was politely ignoring. The gap between what people said and what she knew they were actually experiencing created a cognitive dissonance so profound that casual conversation became psychologically impossible. She couldn't maintain friendships because people felt exposed and uncomfortable around her, even when she never voiced her observations. Her presence alone triggered defensive reactions. Friends would become hostile for reasons they couldn't articulate. Social invitations would dry up without explanation. People would instinctively avoid her, sensing somehow that being around her meant being seen in ways they found threatening. She couldn't hold employment because her presence disrupted the unspoken agreements that keep groups functioning smoothly. Every workplace has collective denial systems. The agreement not to mention the boss's alcoholism, the understanding that everyone will pretend the company isn't failing, the shared commitment to ignoring obvious incompetence in favored employees. Her mere presence threatened these agreements, not through anything she said, but through what everyone sensed she could see. Here's what made this case so significant. Her therapist realized he wasn't treating pathology. He was observing what happens when the unconscious becomes too conscious, when perception becomes too differentiated for social survival. He began documenting her observations about people in her life. The accuracy was remarkable. When he would later verify her perceptions through careful questioning of the individuals involved, her assessments proved correct with disturbing frequency. This wasn't psychosis. This wasn't delusion. This was consciousness so advanced it had become socially dangerous. But the therapist discovered something even more disturbing than the perception itself. The patient wasn't just observing others accurately. She was absorbing their psychological material. She would meet someone briefly and then spend days processing emotions that weren't her own. She would attend a family gathering and leave feeling depressed, anxious, and angry, even though nothing overtly negative had occurred. She described people as if she had direct access to their private thoughts and hidden motivations. And the most unsettling part? She was right. This case revealed a phenomenon that researchers would spend decades trying to understand. Some individuals have psychological apparatus so finely tuned that they absorb not merely conscious communications, but the entire unconscious atmosphere of their environment. Modern research has begun validating these early clinical observations. Studies on highly sensitive persons by researchers like Dr. Eileen Aron show that roughly 20% of people have heightened sensory and emotional sensitivity. Their brains process sensory information more deeply, leading to greater awareness of subtleties in their environment. But within this 20% exists an even smaller subset. Approximately 1% of the population possesses what can only be described as differentiated intuitive function. These individuals don't just feel deeply. They perceive unconscious patterns with startling clarity. Their brains process not just obvious social cues, but unconscious emotional states, repressed psychological content, and behavioral patterns that others cannot detect. They see the depression behind forced smiles. They sense the desperation beneath confident presentations. They feel the collective shadow that groups unconsciously agree to ignore. Neurological research is beginning to explain the mechanisms behind this extraordinary perception. Brain imaging studies show that highly perceptive individuals have increased activity in regions associated with empathy, emotional processing, and social cognition. Their mirror neuron systems appear more active, allowing them to unconsciously simulate the internal states of others. But here's where the danger emerges. This heightened perception creates profound psychic isolation. When you see clearly what others cannot or will not see, you become a mirror that society cannot bear to look into. You reflect back the parts of themselves that people work desperately to hide. You reveal the collective shadow that groups unconsciously agree to ignore. You expose the unspoken truths that everyone knows, but nobody acknowledges. And this creates an impossible situation. Your greatest strength becomes your greatest burden because it separates you from normal social participation. Think about what this means in practical terms. Imagine possessing the ability to immediately detect when someone is lying, not through conscious analysis, but through automatic perception. You're in a business meeting, and your colleague presents a project timeline. Everyone nods in agreement, but you instantly sense the fear and doubt beneath his confident presentation. You know he doesn't believe his own projections. Do you speak up? If you do, You'll be seen as negative, unsupportive, or creating problems where none exist. If you stay silent, you'll have to watch the inevitable failure unfold, knowing you saw it coming. This is the daily reality for individuals with superior perception. They're constantly navigating a world where they know things others don't. But revealing this knowledge makes them socially dangerous. The original case from 1913 revealed something even more disturbing about superior perception. It doesn't just allow you to see others clearly. It makes you a target for psychological projection. When someone's shadow, their denied and repressed qualities, is reflected back through another person's clear perception, the unconscious mind has two choices: integrate what's being reflected or attack the mirror. The clinical documentation from this era shows this pattern repeating consistently. Patients with differentiated intuition experienced systematic targeting. When they would gently suggest that someone seemed troubled, that person would explode at them for being negative or creating drama. When they'd express concern about obvious relationship problems, they'd be accused of being judgmental or manufacturing issues where none existed. This wasn't coincidence. It was psychological defense. Everything that disturbs us about others can lead us to understanding ourselves, but for most people, it's easier to attack the person reflecting their shadow than to examine what's being reflected. This creates what psychologists call the scapegoat phenomenon. Highly perceptive individuals often become the designated problem in every group they enter, not because they cause problems, but because they reveal problems that already exist beneath the surface. They become the repository for everything the group cannot consciously acknowledge about itself. This pattern explains why people with superior perception don't just feel misunderstood. They feel systematically targeted by a force they can't rationally explain. They walk into rooms and feel hostility they didn't create. They join groups and become the focus of blame they didn't earn. They enter relationships and find themselves accused of being the source of problems that existed long before their arrival. The danger of superior perception isn't just that you see too much. It's that what you see makes others profoundly uncomfortable, and they will unconsciously work to remove you from their presence rather than face what you're reflecting. This brings us to the most disturbing discovery about overwhelming perception. It manifests differently in different individuals, and understanding your specific pattern is crucial for learning to integrate this dangerous gift. Chapter 2: The 4 Types of Superior Perception. Superior perception isn't a single, uniform ability. Research into psychological typology reveals 4 distinct patterns of differentiated perception, each representing a different way of processing unconscious information from others. Understanding which type you are is essential for learning integration strategies that actually work. These 4 types aren't rigid categories. Most people with superior perception exhibit a primary type with secondary characteristics from others. But identifying your dominant pattern helps you understand your specific vulnerabilities and strengths. Type 1: The Emotional Absorber. The first type combines superior perception with highly differentiated emotional processing. These individuals don't just see what's happening psychologically in others. They feel it in their own bodies. They absorb others' emotions so completely that they often cannot distinguish between their own authentic feelings and those they've unconsciously absorbed from their environment. If you're an emotional absorber, you've experienced this. You wake up feeling fine, but after spending time with a depressed friend, you feel depressed for days. You enter a tense meeting feeling calm, but leave feeling anxious even though nothing directly threatened you. You visit family members and absorb decades of unresolved emotional conflicts without anyone speaking a word about them. Emotional absorbers live in a state of perpetual emotional contagion. They experience the unlived emotions of everyone in their environment. A parent's suppressed grief becomes their overwhelming sadness. A partner's denied anger becomes their inexplicable irritability. A coworker's hidden insecurity becomes their sudden self-doubt. The danger for emotional absorbers is complete loss of emotional authenticity. They can spend years processing feelings that were never theirs, mistaking absorbed emotional content for their own psychological issues. They often pursue therapy for depression or anxiety, only to discover that their symptoms disappear when they remove themselves from certain environments or relationships. Emotional absorbers frequently report feeling emotionally exhausted without understanding why. They avoid crowds not because they're introverted in the traditional sense, but because being around many people simultaneously means absorbing multiple emotional states at once. Shopping malls, concerts, busy restaurants, all become overwhelming because they're processing not just their own experience, but everyone else's emotional content. The strength of emotional absorbers, once they learn integration, is their extraordinary capacity for empathy and emotional attunement. They make exceptional counselors, healers, and emotional support providers because they genuinely understand what others are feeling. But without integration, they become emotional wrecks who can't function in normal social environments. Type 2. The pattern predictor. The second type sees psychological patterns and predicts behavioral outcomes with startling accuracy. These individuals possess unconscious pattern recognition capabilities that allow them to forecast relationship failures, career disasters, and personal breakdowns long before they become obvious to anyone else. If you're a pattern predictor, you've experienced this. You meet someone new and immediately sense how the relationship will unfold. You observe a couple and know they'll divorce before they realize they're in trouble. You watch someone start a business venture and see exactly how it will fail, not through logical analysis, but through immediate unconscious recognition of dysfunctional patterns. Pattern predictors possess an uncanny ability to perceive the logical conclusions of unconscious processes that others cannot yet see. They recognize the subtle indicators that signal future outcomes, the micro-expressions that reveal someone's true feelings about their career, the speech patterns that indicate a relationship is dying, the behavioral choices that demonstrate someone is heading toward burnout or breakdown. The danger for pattern predictors is chronic frustration and a sense of living ahead of time. They see disasters approaching and feel helpless to prevent them. They warn people about obvious dangers only to be dismissed as negative or paranoid. Then they watch helplessly as their predictions unfold exactly as they foresaw. Pattern predictors often report feeling like Cassandra from Greek mythology, cursed with accurate foresight that nobody believes. They learn to stop sharing their observations because the pain of being right while being ignored becomes unbearable. This creates profound loneliness. They're living in a timeline others haven't reached yet, seeing futures others cannot perceive. The strength of pattern predictors, once integrated, is their ability to serve as early warning systems. They can help individuals and organizations identify problematic patterns before they become catastrophic. They excel in strategic planning, risk assessment, and any field requiring the ability to see beyond current circumstances to likely future outcomes. Type 3. The somatic sensor. The third type senses the physical manifestations of psychological states in others. These individuals detect illness before symptoms fully appear, sense fatigue before it's acknowledged, and feel the bodily tension that indicates emotional distress. They perceive through their bodies rather than through emotional or cognitive channels. If you're a somatic sensor, you've experienced this. You meet someone and immediately feel tension in your own stomach, only to learn later they have digestive issues. You hug a family member and feel pain in your lower back, then discover they have a herniated disc. You spend time with a friend and develop a headache, sensing the unexpressed mental stress they're carrying. Somatic sensors serve as early warning systems for psychological and physical disease in their environment. They pick up on the bodily manifestations of stress, trauma, and illness before conventional medical assessments would detect anything wrong. Their bodies become receivers for the physical states of others. The danger for somatic sensors is taking on physical symptoms that aren't theirs. They can develop phantom pains, mysterious ailments, and chronic physical problems that have no diagnosable cause. Medical professionals often can't find anything wrong because the symptoms aren't originating from their own bodies. They're unconsciously mirroring the physical states of people and their environment. Somatic sensors frequently become hypochondriacs, not because they're anxious personalities, but because they're constantly feeling physical symptoms that seem real but don't show up in medical tests. They may go through endless medical examinations trying to find the source of pains and ailments that disappear when they remove themselves from certain people or environments. The strength of somatic sensors, once integrated, is their ability to serve as health intuitives. They can sense physical problems in others before conventional medicine detects them. They make excellent body workers, energy healers, and medical intuitives because they perceive through somatic channels that most people cannot access. Type 4. The pure intuitive. The fourth and rarest type combines superior perception with what can only be described as undifferentiated auxiliary function. These individuals see everything but have difficulty organizing or expressing their perceptions coherently. They receive vast amounts of unconscious information without adequate psychological structure to process it constructively. If you're a pure intuitive, you've experienced this. You know things about people without knowing how you know. You receive information in dreams, sudden insights, or overwhelming, intuitive downloads that you struggle to articulate. You sense complex psychological dynamics but can't break them down into logical explanations. You see everything but can't organize what you're seeing into coherent frameworks. Pure intuitives live in a state of perpetual overwhelm. They're constantly receiving unconscious information from multiple sources simultaneously without the psychological containers to sort, process, or integrate it effectively. Their perception is like having 50 television channels playing at once without the ability to focus on any single program. The danger for pure intuitives is complete psychological overwhelm and potential dissociation. They can lose touch with consensus reality because their inner perceptive world becomes more real than the external world. They may be dismissed as spacey, unfocused, or unrealistic because they're processing information on levels others cannot access or understand. Pure intuitives often report feeling crazy because their perceptions don't fit into rational frameworks. They know things they shouldn't be able to know. They sense things others insist aren't happening. They perceive psychological realities that have no objective validation. This can lead to severe self-doubt and questions about their sanity. The strength of pure intuitives, once integrated, is their access to information that transcends normal perceptive channels. They can serve as bridges between conscious and unconscious, rational and non-rational, seen and unseen. They excel in fields requiring creative intuition, spiritual counseling, and any domain where linear thinking is insufficient. Understanding your specific type is crucial because each requires different integration approaches. But before we explore integration strategies, you need to understand why psychologists consider this discovery so dangerous in the first place. Chapter 3: The 3 Dangers That Make Superior Perception Deadly. Superior perception isn't just psychologically challenging. Under certain conditions, it poses genuine dangers to both individual well-being and collective social functioning. Understanding these 3 specific dangers is essential for anyone attempting to integrate extraordinary perceptive abilities. These dangers aren't theoretical. They're documented patterns that appear consistently in individuals with differentiated perception. Recognizing them allows you to develop protective strategies before they destroy you. Danger 1: Collective unconscious disruption. The first danger emerges from the fact that human groups function partly through collective unconscious agreements. These are unspoken understandings about what will and won't be acknowledged openly, what truths will be ignored for the sake of group cohesion, what realities will be denied to maintain comfortable illusions. Every family has them. Every workplace has them. Every society has them. These might include the agreement not to mention that the company's business model is failing, the understanding that nobody will acknowledge Dad's drinking problem, the collective decision to pretend that everyone is happy with arrangements that nobody actually wants, or the shared commitment to maintaining facades that everyone knows are false. These collective agreements aren't necessarily malicious. They serve important psychological functions. They allow groups to function without constant confrontation. They provide stability and predictability. They protect individuals from psychological realities they're not yet ready to face. Every organization operates on multiple levels simultaneously. There's the official level, the mission statements, organizational charts, and stated policies. Then there's the real level, the power dynamics, hidden alliances, and unspoken rules that actually determine how things work. Most people learn to navigate by paying attention to the official level while unconsciously respecting the real level. But individuals with superior perception cannot help but see and respond to the real level. They perceive the actual power structures beneath the organizational chart. They sense the real reasons decisions get made, which often have nothing to do with stated rationales. They feel the emotional undercurrents that drive group behavior far more powerfully than any formal policy. This creates an impossible situation. They're operating on a level of reality that everyone else has agreed to ignore in favor of comfortable fictions. and this makes them profoundly threatening to group stability. Consider what happens in a family system where everyone has agreed not to acknowledge Dad's alcoholism. Family members develop elaborate behavioral patterns designed to maintain this collective denial. They schedule activities around his drinking patterns without ever naming why. They make excuses for his absences or inappropriate behavior. They create explanations that preserve the fiction that everything is fine. Then someone with superior perception enters this system. They don't have to say anything about the alcoholism. Their inability to participate in the collective denial is itself disruptive. They can't pretend not to notice. They can't engage in the elaborate behavioral dance designed to maintain the fiction. Their presence alone threatens to collapse the entire denial system. The family system will instinctively move to neutralize this threat. They'll label the perceptive individual as the problem. Too sensitive, too negative, creating drama where none exists. The person who sees clearly becomes the designated scapegoat, carrying the blame for tensions that existed long before their arrival. But here's what makes this dangerous. The individual who perceives too clearly threatens these collective agreements. When someone sees through the shared illusions that hold groups together, they become a destabilizing force, whether they intend to or not. If you possess superior perception, you've experienced this destabilization effect. You join a new workplace and immediately sense the dysfunction that everyone else has learned to ignore. You attend a family gathering and perceive the unspoken resentments that have been accumulating for decades. You enter a friend group and detect the power dynamics and hidden conflicts that everyone pretends don't exist. Even if you never voice these observations, your presence becomes uncomfortable. People sense that you see what they're working hard not to see. Your mere existence becomes a threat to the collective unconscious agreements that keep the group stable. This creates a disturbing dynamic. You haven't done anything wrong, but you're treated as if you're the problem. Groups will unconsciously work to exclude you, not because you're disruptive in obvious ways, but because your clear seeing disrupts the agreed-upon illusions. Organizations, families, and societies need certain levels of unconsciousness to function. Not everyone can handle full transparency all the time. The social contracts that allow large groups to cooperate require some level of strategic blindness, agreed-upon fictions that smooth over conflicts that would be destructive if fully acknowledged. The highly perceptive individual inadvertently violates these agreements simply by existing authentically. They can't pretend not to see. They can't participate in collective denial. Their very presence reminds others of truths they're working hard to avoid. This is why superior perception creates the first danger. You become socially dangerous not through malicious intent, but through your inability to participate in collective unconsciousness. Groups will instinctively move to neutralize or expel you, protecting their necessary illusions from your disrupting clarity. Danger 2. Existential isolation. The second danger emerges from what psychologists call the problem of the superior function. This occurs when your greatest psychological strength becomes the source of your deepest suffering. Your most advanced capability becomes the thing that separates you most painfully from others. Superior perception creates a form of isolation that goes beyond simple loneliness. It's existential isolation, the profound sense that you're living in a fundamentally different reality from everyone around you. When you possess highly differentiated perception, you cannot share your experience of reality with people who don't possess it. You cannot convey what it's like to see psychological dynamics that are invisible to others. You cannot explain how you know things you shouldn't be able to know. You cannot make others understand the overwhelming nature of perceiving everything all the time. This creates a unique form of suffering. You're surrounded by people but profoundly alone. You're in relationships but can't fully share your experience. You're part of communities but isolated within them. The curse of superior consciousness is that it cannot be shared with those who do not possess it. You become an island of awareness in an ocean of unconsciousness. And unlike simple introversion or social anxiety, this isolation cannot be remedied by finding more social connections. You can be in a room full of people and still experience complete existential aloneness. If you possess superior perception, you've felt this isolation in specific ways. You've had conversations where you're discussing surface topics while simultaneously perceiving multiple psychological layers that nobody else acknowledges. You've sat in meetings watching dynamics unfold that everyone else misses entirely. You've been in intimate relationships where your partner cannot access the psychological depth at which you naturally operate. This isolation isn't about being smarter or better than others. It's about operating on different perceptive wavelengths. It's like seeing in color while everyone else sees in black and white, and not being able to convey what color looks like to people who've never experienced it. The existential isolation of superior perception creates several specific problems. First, you lose access to the comfort of shared reality. Most people navigate life within a consensus understanding of what's happening. They agree on what's real, what's important, what's worth paying attention to. This shared framework provides psychological comfort and validation. But when you see things others don't, you lose this comfort. Your reality doesn't match the consensus reality, leaving you constantly questioning whether you're the crazy one or everyone else is asleep. Second, you cannot receive validation for your deepest experiences. When something profoundly impacts you that others cannot perceive, you have nowhere to process it. Your most significant experiences remain unwitnessed and unvalidated. This creates a form of psychological gaslighting where your direct experience is constantly invalidated by others. Inability to perceive what you're perceiving. Third, you develop a protective self-censorship that becomes a prison. You learn to never fully express what you see because doing so consistently results in negative reactions. You become a performer, showing only the parts of your perception that others can handle. Your authentic experience remains hidden, creating a painful split between your public and private selves. The danger here is profound. Existential isolation doesn't just make you lonely. It can make you question your sanity, doubt your perceptions, and lose contact with your own authentic experience. When nobody else sees what you see, eventually you start wondering if you're delusional. When your reality never matches consensus reality, eventually you start doubting your own mind. This is the second great danger of superior perception. Not just social isolation, but existential isolation that can lead to complete loss of confidence in your own psychological reality. Danger 3. Identity dissolution. The third and most dangerous threat comes from what psychologists call participation mystique. a state where psychological boundaries dissolve and you become merged with unconscious contents from your environment. This is perhaps the most serious danger because it threatens the very core of individual identity. Here's how it works. When you possess superior perception, especially the emotional absorber or pure intuitive types, you naturally absorb psychological material from others. This isn't a choice or a conscious decision. It's an automatic function of your perceptive apparatus. At first, this manifests as picking up others' moods or sensing their emotions. But without proper psychological boundaries, it can progress to a dangerous extreme where you lose the ability to distinguish between your own authentic inner world and what you're absorbing from your environment. If you've experienced identity dissolution, you know what this feels like. You wake up and don't know whose feelings you're experiencing. You have thoughts and impulses that don't match your values or personality. You make decisions based on unconscious material you've absorbed from others. Your sense of self becomes fluid, unstable, constantly shifting based on who you've been around. This creates profound psychological danger because identity dissolution means you lose access to your own authentic personality. You become a blank slate that gets written on by everyone around you. You start making life choices based not on your genuine desires, but on absorbed material from family, partners, friends, and even strangers. People experiencing identity dissolution often report feeling like they don't know who they really are. They've spent so much time absorbing and processing others' psychological content that they've lost touch with their own authentic preferences, values, and desires. They look in the mirror and see a stranger, a composite of everyone they've absorbed, rather than a coherent individual self. The danger isn't merely social exile or existential loneliness. It's psychological annihilation, the complete loss of individual identity in favor of collective possession. You become a vessel for others' unconscious material rather than a distinct person with your own psychological integrity. This danger becomes particularly acute during major life transitions, relationship changes, or periods of stress. When your psychological defenses are down, you become even more permeable to others' unconscious contents. You can wake up one day and realize you've been living someone else's life, making someone else's choices, pursuing someone else's goals, all because you absorbed their psychological material and mistook it for your own authentic desires. Identity dissolution explains why many highly perceptive people struggle with basic life questions that others answer easily. What do I really want? What are my actual values? What brings me authentic joy? These questions become nearly impossible to answer when you can't distinguish between your own inner voice and the absorbed voices of everyone you've encountered. The three dangers: collective unconscious disruption, existential isolation, and identity dissolution, represent the ways superior perception can destroy you if left unintegrated. But understanding these dangers allows you to recognize when they're occurring and take protective action before they become devastating. This brings us to the crucial question: how do you integrate superior perception so it becomes a gift rather than a curse? Chapter 4: The integration process that saves your sanity. Integration is the difference between being destroyed by superior perception and being transformed by it. Without integration, you remain overwhelmed, isolated, and at risk of identity dissolution. With proper integration, the same perceptive abilities that once tortured you become sources of profound wisdom and effectiveness. The integration process isn't quick or simple. It requires sustained psychological work across multiple dimensions. But it's the only path from dangerous isolation to conscious service, from overwhelming perception to integrated wisdom. The integration process consists of 3 essential phases, each building on the previous one. Attempting to skip phases or rush the process typically results in relapse into overwhelm. True integration requires patience and systematic development. Phase 1. Recognition and differentiation. The first phase involves learning to recognize when you're absorbing psychological material that isn't your own, and developing the capacity to distinguish between authentic inner experience and unconsciously absorbed external content. This sounds simple, but proves extraordinarily difficult in practice. When you've spent years absorbing others' unconscious material, distinguishing between what's yours and what's absorbed becomes nearly impossible. You've been swimming in psychological soup for so long you can't remember what it feels like to experience only your own authentic inner world. Recognition and differentiation requires developing what psychologists call conscious discrimination, the ability to establish what belongs to you and what belongs to others. Without this discrimination, there can be no individual development. You'll remain a psychological sponge, soaking up environmental content without any sense of your own distinct psychological identity. The primary technique for developing conscious discrimination is structured solitude. This means spending time in complete isolation from other people's psychological fields, allowing absorbed material to settle so you can recognize your own authentic psychological voice. This isn't simply alone time or introversion. This is deliberate, systematic separation from all human psychological contact for specific periods. No social media, no phone calls, no texts, no content created by other humans. Complete psychological isolation. Most people with superior perception initially resist this practice because the idea of more aloneness seems counterproductive when you already feel isolated. But there's a crucial difference between lonely isolation and productive solitude. Lonely isolation means being cut off from meaningful connection while still absorbing environmental psychological content. Productive solitude means deliberately clearing absorbed material so you can discover your authentic self. During periods of structured solitude, absorbed material begins to fade. The emotions that weren't yours dissipate. The thoughts that came from others quiet down. The psychological static clears. And what emerges is something most people with superior perception haven't experienced in years, their own authentic inner voice. This voice is often surprisingly quiet compared to the absorbed material you're used to processing. It's subtle, consistent, and distinctly different from the louder, more dramatic absorbed content. Learning to recognize this authentic voice is the foundation of all integration work. Practical recognition exercises include journaling to track which thoughts and feelings persist through solitude versus which ones fade when you're away from others. Notice which emotional states remain stable versus which ones shift dramatically based on who you've been around. Pay attention to which desires and impulses feel consistently authentic versus which ones seem to come and go based on environmental influences. Another crucial technique is what can be called the boundary breath. Throughout your day, particularly after interactions with others, take 60 seconds to breathe consciously and ask yourself, what did I just absorb? What emotions am I carrying that might not be mine? What thoughts just entered my awareness that don't match my usual patterns? This simple practice creates micro moments of recognition where you catch absorption in real time rather than hours or days later. You begin developing the psychological muscle of continuous discrimination. This is mine, this isn't mine, this is mine, this isn't mine. The recognition phase typically requires 3 to 6 months of consistent practice before conscious discrimination becomes automatic. During this time, you'll have many moments of confusion, doubt, and frustration. This is normal. You're developing a capacity most people never need to develop because they don't absorb psychological material the way you do. Phase 2. Shadow integration. The second phase addresses a paradoxical truth. People who see others' shadows clearly often do so because they haven't integrated their own. The more you deny your own capacity for deception, selfishness, manipulation, cruelty, or weakness, the more disturbed you'll be by seeing these qualities in others. Shadow integration means acknowledging that you contain every human quality you observe in others. This doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a complete person who can see clearly without judgment, superiority, or moral panic. Your shadow consists of all the qualities you've denied in yourself, pushed into unconscious territory because they conflict with your self-image. For many people with superior perception, their self-image revolves around being good, pure, ethical, and honest. They pride themselves on their integrity and moral clarity, but this very self-image creates psychological problems. When you identify as purely good, you must project all your denied negative qualities onto others. And when you can see others clearly, you become hyper-aware of everyone else's shadow while remaining blind to your own. This creates a destructive dynamic where you're constantly disturbed by others' dishonesty, manipulation, selfishness, and cruelty. You feel surrounded by people exhibiting qualities you find disturbing, and you feel increasingly morally isolated, like you're the only person trying to live with integrity. But here's the psychological truth. Everything that irritates you about others can lead to understanding yourself, but only if you have the courage to look inward rather than remaining focused outward. The qualities that disturb you most in others are typically your own unintegrated shadow contents. Shadow integration requires honest self-examination that most people find extremely uncomfortable. It means acknowledging, yes, I am capable of deception when it serves my interests. Yes, I manipulate situations to my advantage. Yes, I can be selfish, cruel, and dishonest under the right circumstances. Yes, I have the same human tendencies I judge in others. This isn't an exercise in self-flagellation or confirming that you're a bad person. It's an exercise in psychological wholeness. When you acknowledge your full range of human capabilities, both light and dark, several transformations occur. First, you stop being shocked and disturbed by others' shadow qualities. You recognize them as universal human tendencies rather than special moral failings. This alone reduces the psychological impact of perceiving others clearly. Second, you develop genuine compassion rather than judgment. When you know you're capable of the same shadow behaviors you observe in others, you respond with understanding rather than moral superiority. You see their struggles as human rather than as evidence of their inferiority. Third, you reclaim tremendous psychological energy. Denying your shadow requires constant vigilance and psychological defense. Acknowledging your shadow frees this energy for constructive purposes. Practical shadow integration exercises include writing detailed lists of qualities you find most disturbing in others, then honestly examining situations where you've exhibited these same qualities, even if in subtle or justifiable ways. Exploring the ways you deceive yourself about your own motivations, manipulate situations to your advantage, act selfishly while rationalizing it as reasonable, and judge others while exempting yourself from the same standards. Shadow integration often requires working with a skilled therapist who can help you see your own blind spots. It's nearly impossible to integrate your shadow alone because by definition you cannot see what you've repressed. You need external reflection from someone trained to recognize psychological defenses. The shadow integration phase typically requires 1 to 2 years of consistent inner work. This isn't a weekend workshop or a quick fix. True shadow integration means fundamentally changing your relationship with your own denied qualities. And this transformation takes time. Phase 3. Conscious participation. The final integration phase involves learning what psychologists call conscious participation in the collective unconscious. The ability to engage with others' psychological contents without being overwhelmed or losing your individual identity. This is the advanced capacity that distinguishes integrated superior perception from unintegrated overwhelm. It means you can perceive clearly, hold others' unconscious contents temporarily, and serve as a bridge between conscious and unconscious realms, all while maintaining your distinct psychological identity. Conscious participation requires developing psychological containers, the ability to hold others' material without it becoming yours. Think of this as developing internal structures that allow you to witness and process psychological content without absorbing it into your own psyche. This capacity allows you to sit with someone's grief without becoming depressed yourself, to understand someone's anger without taking it on, to perceive someone's fear without becoming anxious, to see someone's shadow without being disturbed by it. The material passes through your awareness without sticking to your psychological identity. Developing this capacity requires practice in what can be called conscious holding. This means deliberately choosing to perceive someone's psychological state, fully acknowledging what you're seeing, and then consciously releasing it back to them rather than absorbing it. The technique works like this. When you're with someone and you sense psychological material, you consciously acknowledge it. I am perceiving this person's anxiety. I can feel their fear about this situation. I notice their hidden grief. Then you consciously remind yourself, this is their material. I'm witnessing it, not owning it. I can see it clearly without taking it on. Then, after the interaction, you perform a conscious release. This might involve visualization of handing the material back to them, physical movement to shake off absorbed content, or simply stating aloud, that wasn't mine. I release it back to its source. This might sound like magical thinking, but it's actually sophisticated psychological practice. You're training your unconscious mind to maintain boundaries while still engaging perceptively. You're developing the capacity to serve as a bridge between conscious and unconscious, without becoming a dumping ground for others' unprocessed material. Conscious participation also requires learning strategic disclosure, knowing when, how, and with whom to share your perceptions. Not everyone can handle what you see. Not every situation calls for full transparency. Integration means developing wisdom about when perception serves others and when it simply overwhelms them. This means learning to offer observations as invitations rather than pronouncements. Instead of telling someone what you see, you might ask questions that allow them to discover it themselves. Instead of exposing someone's shadow directly, you might create safe space for them to acknowledge it on their own terms. Conscious participation represents mastery of superior perception. You can see everything, but you're no longer controlled by what you see. You can engage deeply without losing yourself. You can serve as a mirror without being shattered by others' reactions. The three phases, recognition and differentiation, shadow integration, and conscious participation, together create the foundation for transforming superior perception from curse to gift, from danger to wisdom, from psychological liability to evolutionary capacity. But integration alone isn't enough. You also need to understand historical patterns of both successful and failed integration to avoid the pitfalls that have destroyed others with similar gifts. Chapter 5. Learning from History's Perceptive Geniuses. Throughout history, certain individuals have possessed extraordinary perceptive abilities. Some were destroyed by their gifts. Others transformed them into revolutionary contributions. Studying both successes and failures reveals the factors that determine whether superior perception destroys or transforms you. These historical examples aren't just interesting stories. They're case studies in integration versus disintegration, revealing the specific choices and circumstances that lead to dramatically different outcomes for people with similar perceptive capabilities. The case of unintegrated perception. Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche possessed devastating perceptive clarity about human nature, social systems, and philosophical foundations. He saw through religious, moral, and cultural facades with precision that remains shocking even today. His ability to perceive psychological and philosophical realities that others denied made him one of the most influential thinkers in history. But Nietzsche's superior perception ultimately destroyed him. His writings reveal someone who could see through every social mask, detect the psychological motivations behind every moral system, and perceive the unconscious drives underlying all human behavior. He diagnosed the death of God, the rise of nihilism, and the psychological consequences of modernity decades before they became obvious to others. Yet this same clarity led to complete isolation, psychological breakdown, and eventual insanity. What went wrong? Nietzsche possessed extraordinary insight into human nature, but he remained identified with his superior function rather than integrating it into a balanced personality. He never learned conscious participation. Instead of using his perception in service of healing or constructive contribution, he wielded it as a weapon against society. His writings are filled with brilliant insights delivered with contempt for the masses who couldn't see what he saw. He positioned himself as superior to humanity rather than as a servant to human evolution. This created the exact dynamic that destroys unintegrated perception: isolation, bitterness, and eventual psychological collapse. Nietzsche's tragic outcome demonstrates what happens when superior perception remains unintegrated. The individual becomes consumed by what they see rather than transformed by it. They use their gifts to separate themselves from humanity rather than to serve humanity's development. His isolation and eventual breakdown represent the fate awaiting anyone who possesses superior perception without developing the integration capacities that make it sustainable. Raw perception without conscious participation destroys the perceiver. A case of successful integration. Meister Eckhart. In stark contrast, medieval mystic Meister Eckhart represents successful integration of superior perception. Eckhart possessed what can only be described as mystical intuition, the ability to perceive spiritual and psychological realities that others could not access. His sermons and writings reveal someone who saw directly into the nature of consciousness, divine union, and psychological transformation. His insights were so advanced that the medieval church struggled to categorize them, sometimes condemning his teachings as heretical because they transcended conventional theological frameworks. But unlike Nietzsche, Eckhart transformed his superior perception into wisdom that could nourish others without overwhelming them. He saw clearly but spoke in ways that invited understanding rather than resistance. His teachings were profound yet accessible, challenging yet compassionate. What made the difference? Eckhart channeled his insights into compassionate service. He recognized his superior perception as a gift to be shared wisely, not a weapon to be wielded. He developed what psychologists call conscious humility, the recognition that superior perception is meant to serve others' development, not to prove one's own superiority. Eckhart's success demonstrates several key integration principles. First, he maintained spiritual practices that kept him grounded and connected to something larger than his own perceptions. Second, he found communities of practice where his insights were valued rather than feared. Third, he developed sophisticated communication skills that allowed him to convey advanced perceptions without triggering defensive reactions. Most importantly, Eckhart never became identified with being the enlightened one surrounded by ignorant masses. He saw his role as helping others access the same perceptions he possessed, not as confirming his special status. This kept him connected to humanity rather than isolated from it. His legacy shows what becomes possible when superior perception is successfully integrated. Transformative wisdom that serves human development across centuries. The personal integration journey. Carl Jung. Perhaps the most instructive case is Carl Jung himself, who documented his own struggle with overwhelming perception during what he called his confrontation with the unconscious from 1913 to 1919. Jung possessed extraordinary perceptive abilities that allowed him to see psychological patterns, unconscious contents, and archetypal dynamics in himself and others. But during the period following his break with Freud, these perceptions nearly destroyed him. He recorded in his private journals, later published as the Red Book, experiences of being flooded with unconscious material, visions, and psychological insights that threatened to overwhelm his sanity. He described feeling menaced by potential psychosis, saved only by his ability to understand what was happening through his clinical work with patients exhibiting similar patterns. What transformed Jung's dangerous crisis into revolutionary psychological theory? He learned to consciously engage with unconscious contents rather than being passively overwhelmed by them. He developed techniques for active imagination, where he could dialogue with unconscious material without losing his ego identity. He found ways to contain and structure overwhelming perceptions so they became sources of insight rather than causes of breakdown. Jung's breakthrough came when he realized that his overwhelming perceptions weren't pathological but evolutionary. They represented consciousness attempting to evolve beyond current collective limitations. This realization transformed his relationship to his perceptive abilities entirely. Instead of viewing his superior perception as a curse or a sign of mental illness, he understood it as consciousness exploring new territories. He saw himself not as broken, but as participating in the leading edge of psychological development. This reframing alone reduced the terror and isolation of his experiences. Jung's integration process took years of sustained inner work. He didn't achieve integration through a sudden breakthrough, but through patient, systematic development of capacities for conscious engagement with unconscious material. He learned to maintain his individual identity while engaging with contents that could easily have dissolved that identity. His successful integration allowed him to transform his dangerous crisis into the analytical psychology framework that has influenced psychology, spirituality, and culture for over a century. His personal struggle became a gift to human understanding. Jung's journey demonstrates a crucial principle. The same perceptions that threaten to destroy you during the unintegrated phase become your greatest contribution once properly integrated. The material that nearly drove Jung insane became the foundation for revolutionary psychological insights that continue serving human development. Common patterns in historical cases. Studying multiple historical figures with superior perception reveals consistent patterns distinguishing successful integration from destructive outcomes. Failed integration consistently involves several factors: using perception as a weapon rather than a gift, remaining identified with being special or superior, isolating from normal human relationships and communities, refusing to develop communication skills that make insights accessible, becoming bitter or contemptuous toward those who can't perceive as clearly. Successful integration consistently involves viewing perception as a gift meant to serve others, maintaining spiritual practices or grounded routines, finding communities that value perceptive abilities, developing sophisticated communication strategies, remaining humble and connected to ordinary human experience, channeling insights into constructive contributions. The difference isn't in the level of perceptive ability. Many failed cases possessed insights as profound as successful ones. The difference is in how they related to their abilities and what they chose to do with them. This brings us to a crucial realization. Superior perception doesn't exist in isolation. It requires supportive relationships and communities for successful integration. Understanding how to find and cultivate these relationships is essential for long-term sustainability. Chapter 6. Finding Your People in a World That Doesn't See. One of the cruelest aspects of superior perception is the profound isolation it creates. You're surrounded by people, yet fundamentally alone. You're in relationships, but can't be fully known. You're part of communities, but never fully belong. But isolation isn't inevitable. It's a consequence of being surrounded by the wrong people, people who cannot engage with your perceptive depth without defensiveness or discomfort. The solution isn't to be alone. The solution is to find what psychologists call conscious relationships, connections with individuals capable of engaging with differentiated consciousness. This chapter addresses the crucial question: how do you find others who can actually see you when most people can't even see themselves? The answer requires understanding three essential types of relationships that superior perceivers need for psychological survival and successful integration. Type 1. Fellow integrated perceivers. The first essential relationship type consists of others who possess similar perceptive abilities and have successfully integrated them. These are rare individuals, probably less than 1% of the population, but finding even one or two creates profound relief from isolation. Fellow integrated perceivers recognize each other almost immediately. There's a quality of presence, an authenticity, a depth of awareness that cannot be fabricated. When you meet another integrated perceiver, you often experience instant recognition. Finally, someone who operates at the same depth I do. These relationships are characterized by several distinctive features. First, you can speak at full depth without overwhelming the other person. You don't have to edit, simplify, or perform accessibility. You can share perceptions in their full complexity and be met with understanding rather than confusion or defensiveness. Second, there's no competitive dynamic around who sees more or knows more. Integrated perceivers have already worked through the ego inflation that comes with superior perception. They're not trying to prove anything. They're simply being authentic and recognizing authenticity in others. Third, these relationships often develop intense quickly, not in a romantic or dramatic way, but because you recognize each other as members of what can be called the conscious minority. You've both navigated similar challenges. You've both experienced similar isolation. You both understand what it means to see what others don't. Finding fellow integrated perceivers requires putting yourself in specific environments where conscious individuals gather. These might include advanced personal development workshops, serious meditation or spiritual practice communities, professional psychology or counseling circles, or depth-oriented therapy groups. But there's a crucial distinction. You're not looking for people who claim enlightenment or spiritual superiority. You're looking for people who have done serious inner work and can meet you with genuine depth. Beware of communities focused on ego inflation or special status. Look for communities focused on authentic development and integration. The recognition signals that indicate someone might be a fellow integrated perceiver include: they ask genuine questions about your observations rather than defending against them. They can acknowledge their own contradictions without shame or discomfort. They demonstrate psychological mindedness and interest in inner reality. They maintain emotional stability when confronted with uncomfortable truths, and they show genuine curiosity about consciousness and development rather than needing to prove they already know everything. Type 2. Active individuators. The second essential relationship type consists of people who may not possess superior perception themselves, but are actively engaged in their own individuation process. They're doing therapy, committed to inner work, engaged in serious spiritual practice, or otherwise actively developing their consciousness. These individuals can often handle your perceptive abilities without defensiveness because they're used to examining themselves. They've developed some capacity for self-reflection and awareness. They may not see what you see, but they understand that there are depths of reality worth exploring. Active individuators are valuable relationships because they can appreciate your gifts even if they don't share them. They recognize the value of perception and insight. They may actually seek out your observations because they're genuinely interested in understanding themselves more deeply. The key characteristic of active individuators is that they've begun to know themselves, which means they can bear to be known by others. They're not defending against self-knowledge. They're pursuing it. This makes them safe for you to be authentic around. Finding active individuators means looking for people who regularly engage in therapy or coaching, maintain consistent spiritual practices, read books, and attend workshops focused on personal growth, talk about their own inner work and development, demonstrate genuine interest when you share psychological insights, and can acknowledge their own limitations and areas for growth. These relationships won't provide the depth of connection you get with fellow integrated perceivers, but they provide significant relief from isolation. You can be more authentic than you can with most people, even if not completely unfiltered. Type 3. Natural containers. The third essential relationship type consists of individuals who, while not possessing superior perception themselves or being actively engaged in formal inner work, have what can be called natural container function. These are people who can hold psychological content without being overwhelmed by it. Natural containers are often people who have weathered significant life challenges. They've experienced loss, tragedy, hardship, or major transitions that force them to develop psychological depth. They may not have fancy language for consciousness and perception, but they have hard-won wisdom from lived experience. These individuals make surprisingly good friends and partners for superior perceivers because they're not threatened by depth. They've seen enough of life to know that surface appearances are often misleading. They've been through enough to have developed natural empathy and understanding. Natural containers demonstrate several characteristics. They remain emotionally stable during difficult conversations. They don't need constant reassurance or positive reinforcement. They can sit with discomfort without needing to immediately fix or change it. They demonstrate maturity and groundedness in how they handle challenges, and they have a quality of presence that feels safe and stable. Finding natural containers requires looking beyond superficial presentations. The quiet person who's weathered a serious illness might be a natural container. The colleague who lost a child and found a way to continue living might be a natural container. The neighbor who immigrated from a war zone and rebuilt their life might be a natural container. These individuals often won't be found in psychology workshops or personal development circles. They might not use consciousness language or talk about inner work, but they possess earned wisdom that makes them capable of engaging with your depth without being overwhelmed. The gradual revelation protocol. Regardless of which type of relationship you're developing, approaching revelation of your perceptive abilities requires strategy and care. Dumping your full perceptive capacity on someone immediately is likely to overwhelm or frighten them, even if they're capable of eventually handling it. The gradual revelation protocol involves 5 stages of carefully increasing disclosure. Stage 1. Begin with small, Gentle observations. Test the waters with minor insights rather than major revelations. Notice how they respond to simple feedback about psychological dynamics. Stage 2. Assess their response pattern. Do they become defensive or curious? Do they dismiss your observations or engage with them? Do they attack you for being negative or thank you for the insight? Stage 3. Gradually increase depth based on demonstrated capacity. If early observations are well received, offer slightly deeper insights. If they respond poorly, pull back and reassess whether this person can handle your perception. Stage 4. Frame insights as offerings rather than pronouncements. Always give people room to reject or question your observations. Don't present yourself as an absolute authority. Offer your perceptions as one perspective they might find valuable. Stage 5. Maintain flexibility and adjust based on ongoing feedback. Even relationships that start well can become problematic if you overwhelm the person. Continue monitoring their capacity and adjusting your level of sharing accordingly. The goal isn't to find people who accept everything you see without question. The goal is to find people who can engage with your perceptions as valuable contributions to understanding rather than threats to their self-image. This requires patience and discernment. You won't find these relationships everywhere, but they do exist. And finding even a few people capable of seeing you makes the isolation of superior perception manageable. With supportive relationships in place, you're ready to explore how integrated superior perception contributes to both personal transformation and collective evolution. Chapter 7. The 4 Stages of Transformation. Integration of superior perception isn't a single achievement, but an ongoing developmental process. As you work through integration challenges, you move through 4 distinct stages of transformation, each representing a more sophisticated relationship with your perceptive abilities. Understanding these stages helps you recognize where you are in the integration process and what capacities you need to develop to move forward. Each stage builds on the previous one, creating a trajectory from dangerous overwhelm to conscious evolutionary contribution. Stage 1. Recognition without overwhelm. The first transformation occurs when you learn to acknowledge your perceptive abilities without being crushed by them. This sounds simple, but represents a profound shift for most people with superior perception. Before this stage, you're likely experiencing one of 2 extremes. Either you're completely overwhelmed by constant perceptive input, drowning in information you can't process or control, or you're in denial about your abilities, trying to convince yourself you're just overly sensitive or imagining things, attempting to suppress perception that won't be suppressed. Both extremes create psychological suffering. Overwhelm leads to exhaustion, anxiety, and potential breakdown. Denial leads to self-doubt, confusion, and internal fragmentation as you fight against your own nature. The first transformation happens when you can consciously accept, yes, I do perceive things others don't. Yes, this ability is real and legitimate. Yes, this makes my experience of reality fundamentally different from most people's experience. And yes, this is who I am, not a pathology to be cured. This acceptance, which psychologists call conscious acknowledgement of the superior function, creates immediate relief. You stop fighting yourself. You stop questioning your sanity. You stop trying to be someone you're not. Practical steps for achieving stage 1 include educating yourself about superior perception and psychological sensitivity, connecting with others who share similar experiences, working with therapists or counselors who understand high sensitivity and superior perception, keeping detailed journals of your perceptive experiences to validate their reality, and practicing self-compassion rather than self-judgment about your differences. The marker that you've achieved stage 1 is when you can say without shame or confusion, "I am someone who sees what others don't, and that's okay. I don't need to apologize for it or try to be different. This is my psychological reality." Stage 2, integration without isolation. The second transformation involves learning to use your perception constructively while maintaining meaningful relationships. This is what psychologists call social individuation, becoming authentically yourself while remaining connected to others. Before stage 2, you face a painful dilemma. You can be authentic and alone, fully expressing your perceptive abilities, but isolated from normal relationships. Or you can be connected but inauthentic, suppressing your abilities to maintain relationships where you're never truly known. Both options create suffering. Complete authenticity without relationships leaves you isolated and unsupported. Connection without authenticity leaves you unknown and unfulfilled. Stage 2 transformation happens when you discover the middle path, selective authenticity with conscious participation. This means you learn to be fully yourself with people who can handle it, while maintaining appropriate boundaries with people who can't. You engage meaningfully with the world without either overwhelming others or suppressing yourself. This requires developing sophisticated social intelligence. You learn to read not just psychological content, but also people's capacity to engage with that content. You develop what can be called strategic disclosure, knowing what to share, when to share it, and with whom. You also learn to create value with your perception rather than just suffering from it. You find ways to use your abilities that serve others and contribute to your communities. This transforms perception from a burden you carry into a gift you offer. Practical steps for achieving stage 2 include practicing the gradual revelation protocol with new relationships, developing language that makes your insights accessible rather than threatening, finding communities or professions where perceptive abilities are valued, learning to set healthy boundaries around when and how you engage perception, and building a support network of people at various levels of consciousness capacity. The marker that you've achieved stage 2 is when you can say, "I have meaningful relationships where I'm known and valued. I contribute to my communities in ways that utilize my gifts. I'm not choosing between authenticity and connection anymore. I've found ways to have both." Stage 3, service without sacrifice. The third transformation happens when your perception becomes a gift you offer rather than a burden you carry. This is what psychologists call conscious participation, using your abilities in service of others without depleting yourself. Before stage 3, even if you're successfully integrated socially, you may still experience your perceptive abilities as exhausting. Helping others is draining. Using your gifts to serve feels like sacrifice. You're contributing, but at significant personal cost. Stage 3 transformation occurs when you learn to engage your perception in ways that energize rather than deplete you. You discover that authentic service from an integrated place actually nourishes you rather than draining you. This requires understanding the crucial difference between unconscious absorption and conscious participation. Unconscious absorption means you automatically take on others' psychological material without choice or boundaries. This is depleting because you're being used rather than choosing to serve. Conscious participation means you deliberately engage with others' material, hold it temporarily in conscious awareness, and then release it back without taking it into your own psyche. This is nourishing because you're exercising mastery rather than being passively overwhelmed. The key insight is that integrated superior perception isn't actually exhausting. Unintegrated superior perception is exhausting. Once you've developed proper psychological containers and learned conscious release, perception becomes a flow of information through you rather than a weight you carry. Practical steps for achieving Stage 3 include developing pre- and post-interaction rituals that clear absorbed material, learning to set energetic boundaries that allow perception without absorption, finding work or service opportunities that utilize your gifts meaningfully, practicing conscious release techniques after engaging depth with others, and building recovery practices that restore your energy after intensive perceptive work. The marker that you've achieved Stage 3 is when you can say, "I use my perceptive abilities regularly to serve others, and this service energizes rather than depletes me. I've found the balance between giving and receiving. I'm contributing without sacrificing myself." Stage 4. Legacy without attachment. The fourth and final transformation involves using your perception to contribute to collective consciousness evolution without attachment to whether others recognize or accept your contributions. This is what psychologists call the transcendent function, serving the future rather than seeking validation in the present. Before Stage 4, you may be successfully integrated, socially connected, and serving effectively, but you still care deeply about whether people appreciate your contributions. You want recognition for your insights. You feel frustrated when people dismiss or ignore what you see. You need external validation to feel your perceptive work matters. Stage 4 transformation happens when you release attachment to outcomes while maintaining commitment to service. You continue offering your perception and insights, but you're no longer dependent on others' responses. You recognize that you're planting seeds for future harvest rather than expecting immediate gratitude. This requires developing what can be called evolutionary perspective, understanding that consciousness development happens across generations. The insights you share today may not be fully appreciated until decades after you're gone. You're working for collective evolution, not for personal recognition. This stage represents the highest level of integration. You perceive clearly, hold your abilities lightly, see without attachment to fixing everything, and serve naturally without forcing or preaching. You've become what psychologists call a consciousness pioneer, someone whose psychological development precedes collective readiness and helps prepare the path for others. Practical steps for achieving Stage 4 include developing spiritual or philosophical frameworks that provide meaning beyond personal validation, studying history to understand how revolutionary insights are often rejected initially, creating work or contributions that will outlast your lifetime, cultivating inner peace that doesn't depend on external recognition, and mentoring others with similar gifts to carry the work forward. The marker that you've achieved stage 4 is when you can say, I offer my perception and insights as my authentic contribution to human development. I don't need others to agree with or appreciate what I see. I'm serving consciousness evolution itself, and that's enough, the nonlinear nature of transformation. It's important to understand that progression through these 4 stages isn't perfectly linear. You don't achieve stage 1 and never struggle with overwhelm again. You don't reach stage 2 and never experience isolation again. Integration is a dynamic process requiring constant conscious attention. You can regress to earlier stages during periods of stress, trauma, or major life transitions. You can be operating at stage 4 in some areas of life while still struggling with stage 1 in others. The difference is that once you've experienced later stages, you have reference points to return to. You know what integrated perception feels like, so you can recognize when you've slipped back into overwhelm or isolation and take corrective action. The 4 stages represent not a destination, but a developmental spiral you move through repeatedly at deeper levels throughout your life. Each complete cycle through all 4 stages happens at a more sophisticated level of integration. Understanding this prevents the discouragement that comes from expecting perfect, permanent integration. Instead, you recognize integration as ongoing practice, a way of engaging consciousness that requires continuous attention and refinement. With this understanding of transformation stages, we can now address the specific pitfalls that can derail your integration process, even after significant progress. Chapter 8. The Pitfalls that Derail Integration. The path of integrating superior perception contains specific dangers that can undermine even advanced progress. Understanding these pitfalls allows you to recognize them early and take corrective action before they cause serious damage. These aren't theoretical dangers. They're documented patterns that appear consistently in individuals attempting to integrate extraordinary perceptive abilities. Recognizing them in yourself requires brutal honesty, but catching them early prevents years of wasted effort or complete derailment. Pitfall 1. The inflation trap. The first and most common pitfall is what psychologists call psychological inflation, becoming identified with your superior function rather than integrating it consciously. This happens when you start believing that your perceptive abilities make you fundamentally superior to others. Inflation manifests in several ways. You might develop what can be called the prophet complex, believing you must save everyone from their unconsciousness. You start seeing yourself as the enlightened one surrounded by sleeping masses. You feel compelled to wake people up, often with aggressive confrontation or unsolicited insight. Or you might develop spiritual superiority, convincing yourself that your perceptive abilities indicate you're more evolved, more awake, or more conscious than others. You begin judging people who can't see what you see, viewing them as less developed or less aware. The danger is that the ego identifies with the archetype of the seer or prophet, leading to an inflation that cuts you off from genuine human relationships. When you believe yourself to be the bearer of absolute truth, you've fallen into the trap of unconscious possession by the very forces you seek to understand. Inflation creates several destructive dynamics. First, it makes you insufferable to be around. People sense your superiority complex even if you don't explicitly state it. Your presence becomes condescending rather than helpful, judgmental rather than compassionate. Second, it prevents you from seeing your own blind spots. When you're identified with being the one who sees clearly, you become blind to ways you're still unconscious. You project your own shadow while believing you have superior self-awareness. Third, it isolates you in exactly the ways unintegrated perception does. You end up alone again, but now convinced it's because others can't handle your enlightenment rather than because you've become unbearable. The antidote to inflation is continuous humility practice. This means regularly reminding yourself that your perceptive abilities are gifts you received, not achievements you earned. They don't make you better than others, just different. They're meant to serve others' development, not to prove your superiority. Practical deflation practices include actively seeking feedback about how your behavior impacts others. Surrounding yourself with people who will call out your ego inflation, studying your own blind spots as rigorously as you observe others, acknowledging areas where you're still unconscious or struggling, and remembering that perception without compassion is just weaponized observation. Pitfall 2, the withdrawal justification. The second pitfall involves using your superior perception to justify complete withdrawal from society. This happens when you convince yourself that others are too unconscious to be worth engaging, that the world is too toxic for your sensitive nature, or that you're too advanced for normal human relationships. This pitfall is particularly seductive because it contains a kernel of truth. Many people are operating unconsciously. Society does have significant dysfunction. Your sensitivity does make certain environments genuinely difficult, but withdrawal justification uses these truths to rationalize giving up on humanity. You retreat into isolation, convincing yourself it's wisdom rather than defeat. You frame your avoidance as spiritual discernment rather than social failure. The danger here is that true individuation requires engagement with the unconscious world, not escape from it. The hermit who withdraws from life has not transcended it, but has been defeated by it. You cannot serve consciousness evolution from a position of complete withdrawal. Withdrawal justification manifests in several ways. You might create increasingly strict criteria for who's conscious enough to deserve your time. You might develop elaborate philosophies about why the masses are hopeless. You might convince yourself that your isolation is evidence of your advanced development rather than evidence of failed integration. The problem is that this pitfall feels like wisdom. It feels like you're protecting your energy and maintaining healthy boundaries. But there's a crucial difference between conscious solitude for integration purposes and justified withdrawal from failed integration. Conscious solitude is temporary and purposeful. You retreat to restore, integrate, and develop capacities that allow you to re-engage more effectively. Justified withdrawal is permanent and defensive. You retreat to avoid the challenge of integration and engagement. The antidote is maintaining regular engagement with normal human life, even when it's challenging. This means keeping jobs, maintaining relationships, participating in communities, and finding ways to contribute despite the difficulty of being highly perceptive in an unconscious world. Practical engagement practices include setting concrete goals for social participation, volunteering and service roles that force interaction, maintaining employment even when it's challenging, deliberately building relationships with people at various consciousness levels, and regularly examining whether your solitude is serving integration or enabling avoidance. Pitfall 3. The helper's high. The third pitfall involves becoming addicted to being needed. This happens when you define yourself entirely through your ability to see and help others, losing contact with your own inner development in the process. Helper's high feels noble. You're dedicating yourself to serving others, using your perceptive gifts to help people who are struggling. But when perception becomes identity, the person disappears behind the function. This is not individuation, but its opposite, the sacrifice of personality to role. This pitfall is particularly dangerous because it masquerades as integration. You're not isolated anymore. You're connected through helping. You're using your gifts in service. But you've replaced authentic identity with helper identity, which is just another form of losing yourself. The signs of helper's high include inability to rest or stop helping, feeling personally responsible for others' development or healing, deriving your entire sense of worth from helping others, neglecting your own needs and development to serve others, and feeling empty or worthless when you're not in helper mode. The danger is that you're still not actually integrated. You've just found a socially acceptable way to lose your identity. Instead of losing yourself through unconscious absorption, you're losing yourself through compulsive service. Either way, the authentic self disappears. This pitfall often develops after successfully navigating earlier stages. You've learned to manage your perception. You've built helping relationships. But you've swung too far into service, making it your entire identity rather than one expression of an integrated self. The antidote is maintaining your own inner development as rigorously as you would tend to others. This means having your own therapy, your own spiritual practice, your own creative expression, and your own life beyond helping others. Practical balance practices include scheduling regular time for non-helping activities, developing identity elements unrelated to perception or service, learning to say no to helping requests without guilt, investing in your own growth rather than only others' growth, and examining whether you're using helping to avoid facing your own inner work. Pitfall 4. The overwhelm return. The fourth pitfall involves regression to earlier stages during stress, trauma, or major life transitions. Even successfully integrated individuals can find themselves suddenly overwhelmed again, flooded with others' unconscious contents, unable to maintain the boundaries they've developed. This pitfall is particularly demoralizing because it feels like failure. You thought you had integration figured out, and suddenly you're back in overwhelm. You thought you'd moved past this struggle, but here you are again, drowning in perception you can't control. The danger is giving up entirely, concluding that integration is impossible or that you're fundamentally broken. But overwhelm return isn't failure. It's a normal part of the integration process. Life presents challenges that temporarily exceed our integration capacity. Deaths of loved ones, serious illness, job loss, relationship endings, major transitions. During these times, the psychological resources we use for integration get redirected to basic survival. Our carefully developed boundaries become permeable again. Understanding this prevents despair. When overwhelm returns, it doesn't mean you've lost all your progress. It means you're facing circumstances that require additional support and conscious effort to maintain integration. The antidote is having emergency protocols ready before crisis hits. This means knowing in advance what practices restore your integration when it slips, what support you need during difficult times, and what boundaries you need to temporarily strengthen. Practical overwhelm prevention includes maintaining core integration practices even during good times, building support networks before you need them urgently, recognizing early warning signs of integration slipping, having plans for reducing stimulation during crisis periods, and remembering that temporary regression doesn't erase all previous progress. The Integration Maintenance Protocol. Because these pitfalls are common even after significant integration progress, maintaining conscious integration requires ongoing practices. Daily maintenance practices include morning solitude for distinguishing your psychological contents from absorbed material, conscious choice about when and with whom to engage perceptive abilities, regular shadow work to prevent projection of your own unconscious contents, connection with others capable of providing reality checking and support, and creative expression as an outlet for overwhelming perceptive input. The integrated person does not achieve perfection, but learns to dance consciously with their own psychological complexity. Integration isn't a destination, but a dynamic process requiring constant attention. Understanding these pitfalls and maintenance practices prepares you to sustain integration over the long term. But sustaining personal integration is only part of the picture. Superior perception exists within a larger context of collective psychological development, which brings us to your evolutionary role. Conclusion. Your role in consciousness evolution. We've reached the end of this exploration, but really, you're standing at a beginning. Everything you've learned about superior perception, its dangers, and its integration process points toward a larger truth. You're not just managing a personal psychological challenge. You're participating in human consciousness evolution. This final chapter addresses the bigger question: why do people with superior perception exist at all? What purpose does this dangerous gift serve? And what does it mean for your life once you understand your role in the larger pattern? The evolutionary function of superior perception. Throughout history, certain individuals have possessed consciousness that exceeded collective readiness. They saw psychological realities before cultures were prepared to acknowledge them. They perceived patterns before societies could integrate them. They understood depths before humanity had language for them. These individuals served as what psychologists call consciousness pioneers. They were advanced scouts for psychological territories that humanity would eventually need to explore. Their personal struggles with perception that exceeded collective capacity were actually experiments in consciousness development that would later benefit everyone. Think about what this means. Every major shift in human consciousness began with individuals who saw possibilities others couldn't imagine. The recognition of unconscious processes, the understanding of shadow dynamics, the awareness of collective psychological patterns. All of these started with people like you, people whose perception exceeded what their cultures could yet comprehend. Your overwhelming experiences, your isolation, your struggles with perception that others deny, these aren't signs that something's wrong with you. They're signs that your consciousness is operating ahead of collective development. A sensitive individual feels collective problems first and most intensely. Your personal symptoms often reflect what the entire culture needs to address but isn't yet ready to acknowledge. You're experiencing the leading edge of consciousness evolution, and it's painful precisely because you're ahead of the collective curve. Modern manifestations of advanced perception. In our current era, individuals with superior perception are likely sensing psychological patterns that won't become obvious to mainstream culture for years or decades. You might be perceiving collective shadow contents that need conscious integration before they manifest destructively. You might be sensing environmental and social unsustainability before economic collapse makes it undeniable. You might be recognizing the limitations of current institutions before they become apparent to everyone. You might be feeling spiritual possibilities beyond current religious frameworks before new paradigms emerge. This is why your experiences feel so isolating. You're not just personally ahead of your social circle. You're psychologically ahead of your time. The realities you perceive daily are realities that collective consciousness hasn't yet developed capacity to acknowledge. But here's the crucial insight. Your role isn't to force collective consciousness to catch up to you. Your role is to maintain your perceptive clarity while developing the integration wisdom that allows you to participate constructively in collective evolution. You're not here to be a martyr to consciousness, suffering alone with perceptions nobody believes. You're here to be a bridge between what is and what's becoming, helping to make the unconscious conscious in ways that serve rather than overwhelm collective development. Service without martyrdom. The integrated individual serves collective evolution not by sacrificing their individuality, but by developing it so completely that it becomes a gift to the whole. You don't serve consciousness evolution by destroying yourself with overwhelm. You serve it by mastering integration so your perception becomes cultural medicine rather than personal torture. This requires a fundamental shift in how you understand your purpose. You're not here to be the enlightened one surrounded by sleeping masses. You're not here to save everyone from their unconsciousness. You're not here to prove how much more aware you are than others. You're here to develop conscious relationship with your perceptive abilities, and then to live that consciousness authentically in ways that create possibility for others. Not by preaching, not by forcing, but by embodying more conscious ways of being that demonstrate what becomes possible through integration. Think about the historical figures we discussed. Meister Eckhart didn't serve consciousness evolution by condemning everyone else's unconsciousness. He served it by transforming his mystical perception into wisdom that could nourish seekers across centuries. Carl Jung didn't serve psychology by attacking everyone who couldn't see what he saw. He served it by documenting his integration process so thoroughly that others could learn from his journey without having to repeat all his mistakes. Your service works the same way. You serve consciousness evolution most effectively, not through dramatic sacrifice, but through patient integration that creates new possibilities for those who follow. The ultimate integration, holding it all lightly. At the highest level of development, integrated individuals hold their perceptive abilities lightly. They see clearly without attachment to others accepting what they see. They perceive deeply without compulsion to fix everything they observe. They understand profoundly without needing to prove their understanding. This is the transcendent function psychologists describe, the ability to serve consciousness evolution naturally, without forcing or preaching, simply by embodying more conscious ways of being. You can be in the world, but not consumed by what you see in it. You can perceive everything without being destroyed by the perception. You can serve without sacrificing yourself. You can contribute without demanding recognition. This is mastery. Perception without overwhelm, awareness without inflation, service without depletion, contribution without attachment. Remember the patient from 1913 we discussed at the beginning of this audiobook? After years of integration work, her life transformed completely. She learned to distinguish between her own psychological contents and what she absorbed from others. She found work where her differentiated perception helped troubled individuals. She built relationships with people who valued her insights rather than fearing them. Most importantly, she stopped experiencing her superior perception as a curse and began understanding it as a gift requiring conscious development. She learned not to see less, but to see more wisely, not to perceive less deeply, but to engage more consciously with what she perceived. Her gift remained intact, but her relationship to it became integrated rather than overwhelming. This represents the possibility available to everyone with superior perception. Transformation from dangerous overwhelm to conscious service, from psychological liability to evolutionary contribution. Your dangerous gift is exactly what humanity needs. Your superior perception isn't a malfunction in your psychological makeup. It's an advanced feature of consciousness development. You're not broken because you see everything others miss. You're psychologically ahead of your time, whether you wanted to be or not. The question was never whether you should suppress your perception to fit in with collective unconsciousness. The question was always whether you'll develop the individuation skills necessary to integrate your perception consciously. The integration method we've explored in this audiobook offers a path from dangerous isolation to conscious service, from overwhelming perception to integrated wisdom, from psychological curse to evolutionary contribution. You were born to see everything, not to suffer in silence, but to serve consciousness evolution. The world needs your insights, but it needs them delivered with the integration wisdom and strategic awareness that transform dangerous perception into cultural medicine. Your gift is not your burden. Your unconscious relationship to your gift is your burden. Learn to integrate it consciously, and you become exactly what psychologists believed highly perceptive individuals were meant to be. Consciousness pioneers preparing humanity for psychological development that is inevitable but not yet obvious. The most dangerous discovery isn't that some people see everything. It's that most people who see everything never learn to use what they see wisely. The danger isn't in the perception itself, but in failing to develop conscious relationship with extraordinary abilities. You are not too much for this world. You are exactly what consciousness evolution requires. Once you learn to wield your perception as consciously as the masters who came before you learned to wield theirs, the danger of seeing everything isn't that you see too much. It's that you might never learn to see with the integration and wisdom your gifts demand. If you recognize yourself in this description of the highly perceptive individual, you're part of a rare psychological type that serves an essential function in consciousness evolution. You're not alone even though it often feels that way. Others are walking this path, navigating these same challenges, working toward the same integration. Your individuation journey connects with others walking the same path. Together, you're not just managing personal psychological challenges. You're participating in something much larger, the evolution of human consciousness itself. And that's not a burden to carry. That's a privilege to embrace. Thank you for listening to this audiobook. May you find your way from overwhelm to integration, from isolation to conscious participation, from suffering your gifts to serving with them. The world is waiting for what only you can see. Once you learn to share it with the wisdom and integration it deserves,